Hey guys, tonight we slip through the heavy oak doors of a medieval manor house, where the air smells of wood smoke and damp straw, and torchlight flickers on stone walls hung with faded tapestries. Picture yourself treading softly on rushes strewn. Across the floor, the distant clang of a kitchen pot echoing from the shadows. You're here to uncover why medieval servants were brutalized like slaves. There lives a grind of relentless labor, violence, and chains in the 12th to 15th centuries. A world of lords and serfs where freedom was a whisper. Trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a day hauling their water, let alone the lash of a lord's wrath. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the Great Hall, its high beams looming like a cage, but the real story's in the corners behind. The trestle tables, where servants scurry, their faces shadowed by exhaustion. It's the 13th century, and Europe's feudal system is a pyramid of power, with lords at the top and you, a servant, let's call you Alice, at the bottom. Your life owned by the manor's master, Lord Ranulph. You're not here for the knights feasting or the ladies spinning. You're here for the cooks, maids, and stable hands, whose brutal treatment echoed slavery's cruelty. A truth hidden beneath the era's tapestries and tales. You're Alice, and you're feeling the weight of a world where your every move belongs to someone else. A shadow of the Victorian servitude we explored. Let's ground this with a mainstream fact. Medieval servants, often serfs or villeins, were bound to their lords' estates, performing labor for minimal reward. With over 80% of Europe's population tied to such service by the 13th century. As noted in manorial records, you were legally obligated to work plowing fields, scrubbing hearths, serving feasts, your life tied to the land, unable to leave without permission. Your status barely above a slave's. You're carrying a pitcher of ale to the high table, your arms aching, and you're wary, knowing a spilled drop could earn a beating. The manor's bustle, a stark contrast to the grueling tasks we'll see in the kitchen, where your freedom's traded for survival. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Servants sometimes wore lords' tokens. Crude iron tags stamped with a manor's crest hung around your neck to mark you as property, like livestock. In the 13th century, archaeological finds show these, a grim badge of servitude. You're fingering yours, its weight chafing, and grinning. It's like a medieval dog tag, less charming than the Victorian livery badges we saw. You're half wishing you could toss it into the fire, but Lord Ranulph Stewart, watching from the days, keeps you in check, a reminder of the chains that bind you, like the character books that branded later maids. But not everyone agrees on why servants faced such brutality. Historians still argue whether their treatment was driven by economic necessity, to sustain feudal estates, or a deliberate system to enforce power, with no clear motive in manor rolls or chronicles. Some, citing agricultural demands, say harsh labor and control were needed to feed growing populations. Others, pointing to lords' violence, argue it was about domination, mirroring slavery to keep serfs submissive. Like the stigma we'll see in medieval towns. You're pouring ale, Lord Ranulph's laugh booming, and wondering if he beats you to keep the manor running, or to feel like a king. The hall's warmth a lie. The wedding night's fears we felt in another era, a faint echo of your own, where power crushes the powerless. Step closer to the hearth and notice the details. The warm crackle of logs, the faint clink of goblets, the way the token's iron bites your skin. a constant claim. This hall's a stage, like the Victorian foyer's grandeur we marveled at, but it's a prison for you. Alleys, where every task is a shackle. The societal rules of lords and vassals as rigid as later parlors. You're feeling the paradox. You're vital, keeping this manor alive, but disposable. Your life owned by Ranulph's whims. The ignorance we saw in Victorian myths, now a feudal law that binds you. You're thinking of that token, a mark of ownership, and how it ties to a world that needs your hands but not your heart. Like the laudanum vials that numbed other pains we met. Time for a quick joke. Why was the token so cold? Because it froze. Alice's dreams solid. You're smirking, but it's quiet. The steward's cough keeps you alert. You're catching a scullion's weary glance across the hall, her hands as raw as yours, and sensing the stakes. Servants like you weren't, just workers. You were chattel, bound by laws as tight as a noose. Your day's a grind to uphold someone else's glory. The wedding night's legal chains we saw a distant kin to this bondage. You're wondering about the girl who served here before. If she broke under the lash or fled, her story lost in the rushes. The fear's not just of pain, it's of erasure, a life where you're less than the ale you pour. As you slip toward the kitchen, Lord Ranulph's voice fading, you're bracing for another day. The halls fire a fleeting warmth. Your role as Ali's a weight you can't shed. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just one manor, it's a society built on your back, where servants were brutalized to keep the feudal wheel turning. Their treatment a shadow of slavery's cruelty. You're thinking of those lords' tokens, branding you like cattle, like Victorian shame boards branded later maids, and how they reflect a world that valued power over people. You're wondering about the servant you'll be, if you'll endure or crack, and the thousands like you, their lives unseen. The torch dims, the kitchen looms, and you're carrying this brutal truth, ready to explore the feudal system that chained you, a web as tight as the manor's walls. One last chuckle. Why was the hall so grand? Because it hid Alice's tears better. You're stepping into the passage, the pitcher set down, as the manor's pulse quickens. With the servants, struggles heavy in your heart, you're ready to dive into the feudal chains that bound them, a system as cruel as the token's bite. You're weaving through the smoky bustle of the manor's kitchen, the air thick with the scent of sizzling fat and the sharp tang of onions simmering in a cauldron. Torches sputter on the stone walls, casting jittery light. And your Ali's, a kitchen servant in the 13th century, your coarse tunic damp with sweat as you stir a pot, dodging the cook's barked orders. The great hall's feasts we glimpsed are a world away, but its demands fuel this chaos. The Lord's token around your neck, a constant tug from last time's weight. You're here to explore the feudal chains that bound medieval servants, the rigid system that enslaved you to the manor, stripping your freedom with laws and labor as brutal as slavery. This is the yoke of servitude, and you're feeling its grip, tight as the iron ladle in your calloused hands, heavy as the manor's stone. The mainstream fact is that the feudal system, dominant in medieval Europe from the 9th to 15th centuries, legally bound most servants, often serfs or villeins, to their lord's estate. As recorded in manorial court rolls and Domesday Book entries 1086. As a serf, you owed Lord Ranulph labor plowing, cooking, cleaning in exchange for a scrap of land to farm. But you couldn't leave, marry, or own property without his consent. Your life tethered like a slave's. You're stirring faster, the cook's glare burning, knowing you're tied to this manor by birth. The hall's grandeur, we saw a facade for your chains. The scullery's tasks will face a mere cog in this system, as binding as the Victorian hierarchy we met in another time. But here's a quirky tidbit. Serfs sometimes wore fealty rings, rough iron bands given during oaths to lords, symbolizing their bond to the manor, like a grim wedding vow. In the 13th century, village finds show these, often etched with a cross. You're twisting one on your finger, its rust scratching, and grinning. It's like a medieval loyalty card, less shiny than those lords' tokens we felt last time. You're half tempted to slip it off, dreaming of escape. But the steward's shadow by the door keeps you stirring, the feudal bond as unyielding as the fines we'll see. A chain no rebellion, like the Victorian pantry whispers, can break. Historians still argue whether feudal servitude was primarily an economic necessity or a deliberate power grab by lords, with no clear motive in charters or chronicles. Some, citing agricultural needs, say it was a system to ensure labor for growing estates. Others, pointing to lords' unchecked authority, argue it was designed to dominate, treating you like a slave to cement control, like the stigma wheel. Face in towns, you're tasting the broth, your wrist aching, and wondering if Lord Ranulph binds you to feed his manor or to flaunt his might. The hall's feasts, the scullery's toil, and the token's weight we faced, now a web of laws. The wedding night's legal chains we felt in another era, a faint echo of this servitude. Your life owned by the landlord. Time for a quick joke. Why was the fealty ring so tight? Because it hugged Alice's freedom goodbye. You're chuckling, but it's hush. The cook's curse at a spilled pot drowns it, and you're wary of her ladle's swing. You're ladling broth, the kitchen's heat searing, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The kitchen's a sweltering chaos, with a massive hearth roaring, spits turning, and servants' cooks, scullions darting like ants, their tunics soaked. You're not in the hall's torchlit glow, or the town's scornful streets we'll see. You're in the manor's gut, where feudal chains are forged. As a serf, you're not just a servant, you're the manor's property, born to serve Lord Ranulph. Your days dictated by his needs, the tasks we'll scrub through a sentence. The hierarchy's ranks we saw in Victorian times, now a feudal pyramid, with you at its base. Like the ignorance that bound brides in other tales, the system's not just work, it's ownership. Your children bound too. The manor's fields and feasts your prison. The laudanum like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this bind. Though you stir on, Alice's grit your anchor. Step closer to the cauldron and notice the details. The scalding steam on your face, the faint clank of a spit, the way the ring's rust stains your skin, a mark of your bond. This kitchen's your cell, like those character books we carried in later eras. But it's primal, a space where your life's not yours. You're thinking of that lord's token, how it brands you, and how the feudal system oaths, labor, land mirrors the punishments we'll face, each order a shackle. You're wondering why you can't flee, why your labor's worth less than a knight's horse. The myths of divine order will hear a cruel jest as you sweat, strong, but enslaved. You're craving release, but the manor's walls are your world, the system a noose, like the wages trap we saw in Victorian days. Here's another chuckle. Why was the manor so big? Because it needed room for Alice's chains. You're smiling, but its grim scullion's cough pulls you back, her eyes as tired as yours. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the token's weight, the manor's demands they've led here, where feudal chains are the servant's law. Not just work, but a life stolen, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those scullery songs from Victorian times, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other servants, ploughmen, maids, their bonds like yours, each stir a shared burden. their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight, now crushed by this system's yoke. As you pass the pot to the cook, her grunt a rare mercy, you're aching for a life beyond the manor. The kitchen's heat a cage, the feudal chains a knot you can't untie, like the token's clasp. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a system, it's a theft, brutalizing servants like slaves by owning their days, driven by land and power. You're thinking of those fealty rings, binding you like Victorian fines bound later maids, and how they reflect a society that thrives on your submission. You're wondering about the servant you'll be, if you'll bear these chains or break. And the thousands who've stirred here before, their lives lost in the steam. The torch dims, the kitchen roars, and you're carrying this chained life, ready to face the grueling labor that defined your days, a toil as harsh as the Lord's rule. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the chain so strong? Because it loved Alice's labor more. You're wiping your hands, the pot simmering, as the kitchen's din surges, with feudal chains heavy in your soul. You're ready to witness the grueling labor servants endured, a grind that broke their bodies. You're knee-deep in the muddy yard behind the medieval manor, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth, and the sour tang of manure from the stables nearby. A cold wind bites through your threadbare tunic, and your Alice, a servant in the 13th century, you're back aching as you haul a wooden bucket of slop to the pigsty, its weight pulling at your arms. The kitchen's heat from last time's cauldron is a memory, replaced by the grunt of livestock and the steward's distant shout to hurry. The manor's stone walls loom, a reminder of the feudal chains we felt binding you to Lord Ranulph's will. You're here to witness the grueling labor that defined medieval servants' lives, a relentless grind of tasks that broke bodies and spirits, mirroring the brutality of slavery. This is the crush of toil, and you're feeling its strain, heavy as the bucket slosh, raw as the blisters on your hands. The mainstream fact is that medieval servants, particularly serfs like you, performed exhausting manual labor from dawn to dusk, often 12 to 16 hours daily, across a range of tasks: farming, cleaning, animal care, and manor upkeep as recorded in manorial accounts and labor obligations from the 13th century. You plowed fields, mucked stables, scrubbed hearths, and carried water, your body pushed to its limits to keep the manor running, with no rest beyond holy days, if granted. You're dumping the slop, pigs squealing, and you're panting. Your day starting before sunrise with milking and ending past dark with spinning wool. The feudal system's demands we explored last time a whip driving you, the great halls. Feasts we saw a distant reward for your sweat, as punishing as the Victorian scullery's grind we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Servants sometimes used task chants, rhythmic rhymes sung to pace grueling work, like hauling or threshing, passed down in village oral traditions. In the 13th century, these chants, with lines like "heave the load, break the sod," were a quiet defiance, like the scullery songs we hummed in later eras. You're muttering one now. Slop the swine, keep the line, and grinning it's like a medieval workout playlist, grittier than those fealty rings we twisted last time. You're half tempted to chant louder, letting the steward hear, but his shadow by the barn keeps you soft. The labor's grind as unyielding as the token's chafing we felt, a burden no song can lighten. Historians still argue whether this grueling labor was driven by the manor's survival needs, or a deliberate strategy to exhaust servants into submission. With no clear motive in estate records or chronicles, some, citing agricultural cycles, say it was essential to feed growing populations. Others, pointing to serfs' broken health, argue it was a tool to reinforce their slave-like status, ensuring control. You're wiping sweat, your shoulders screaming, and wondering if Lord Ranulph works you to death for grain or power. The kitchen's chaos, the feudal chains, and the hall's demands we face, now a treadmill that buries you. The wedding nights, physical fears we felt, a faint echo of this bodily toll. Your strength stolen by the manor's greed. Time for a quick joke. Why was the bucket so cruel? Because it loved breaking Alice's back. You're chuckling, but it's hushed. A stable boy's cough nearby drowns it, his hands as raw as yours. You're kicking mud off your boots, the slop emptied, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The yard's a muddy sprawl, with pigs rooting, chickens clucking, and a cart creaking under hay. The manor's lifeblood pulsing through your labor. You're not in the kitchen's steaming heart or the hall's torchlit feasts. You're in the manor's raw edge, where tasks never end. You're hauling, digging, cleaning slop for pigs, water for the hall, wood for fires, each job a blow to your body. The feudal system placing you below even the scullion, who scrubs pots. The hierarchy's ranks we saw in Victorian times, now a medieval caste. Like the ignorance that crushed souls in other tales. The work's not just hard, it's endless, a cycle that grinds your bones. The laudanum-like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this ache, though you trudge on. Alice's resolve your core, step closer to the pigsty, and notice the details. The cold slop splashing your legs, the faint bellow of oxen, the way your tunic clings, soaked with effort, a mark of your toil. This yard's your battlefield, like those lords' tokens branding your neck. But it's physical, a space where your body's spent for others' gain. You're thinking of that fealty ring, how it binds you to this labor, and how the tasks plowing, threshing, mucking mirror the punishments we'll face, each load a lash to your spirit. You're wondering why your sweat feeds Ranulph's table, why your pain's worth less than his hounds. The myths of noble lords will hear a cruel, just as you labor, strong but enslaved. You're craving rest, but a bell clangs more would needed, and you're moving, the grind a chain. Like the Victorian wages net we counted. Here's another chuckle. Why was the pigsty so messy? Because it knew Alice's hands were full. You're smiling, but it's grim. The stable boy's grunt pulls you back, his load as heavy as yours. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the manor's demands they've led here, where labor's the servant's sentence, not just work but a life broken. Like the wedding night's surrender we faced, you're remembering those task chants, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rubble marks we carved in later eras. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other servants' milkmaids, plowmen, their tasks like yours. Each bucket a shared burden, their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight. Now crushed by this relentless grind, as you hoist another bucket, the steward's shout spurring you. You're aching for a moment's pause. The yard's mud a trap, the labor's toll a weight you can't shed, like the ring's rust. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just work, it's a system, brutalizing servants like slaves by breaking their bodies, driven by land and lords. You're thinking of those task chants, a fleeting voice, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that thrives on your exhaustion. You're wondering about the servant you'll be, if you'll outlast this grind or collapse, and the thousands who've hauled here before, their lives lost in the mud. The wind rises, the manor looms, and you're carrying this grueling toil, ready to uncover the violence lords wielded, a brutality as harsh as the bucket's pull. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the labor so endless? Because it loved Alice's pain more. You're setting the bucket down, the pigs fed, as the yard's din surges. With grueling labor heavy in your soul, you're ready to face the violence that punished servants, a lash that sealed their servitude. You're crouched in the dim, straw-strewn stable of the medieval manor, the air thick with the musky scent of horses and the damp chill of packed earth under your knees. A single torch sputters on the wall, casting jagged shadows, and your Alice, a servant in the 13th century, your hands trembling as you rake soiled bedding, the sting of a fresh welt on your arm throbbing from Lord Ranulph's steward. The yard's muddy toil from last time's pigsty is a memory, but its ache lingers. The feudal chains we felt tightening with every task now sharpened by the threat of violence. You're here to uncover the physical punishments that brutalized medieval servants, the lash, slap, or worse that lords wielded to enforce their slave-like servitude, a brutality as raw as the blood on your sleeve. This is the whip of power, and you're feeling its sting, sharp as the straw pricking your skin, heavy as the fear knotting your gut. The mainstream fact is that medieval lords and their stewards frequently used physical violence to discipline servants, with beatings, whippings, or confinement common for perceived infractions, as recorded in manorial court rolls and legal documents from the 13th century. As a serf, you could be struck for spilling ale, working too slowly, or speaking out, with no legal recourse. Your body is bound to Lord Ranulph's will as the land we explored in the feudal system. You're raking faster, the welt from dropping, a tray yesterday burning, and you're terrified, knowing the steward's temper could flare again. The kitchen's grind we stirred through, and the yard's labor we hauled now a backdrop to this violence, as cruel as the Victorian fines we faced in another era, but bloodier. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some lords used punishment tallies, notched sticks kept by stewards to track your infractions, like a grim scorecard, with each mark earning a lash or fine. In the 13th century, archaeological finds show these, etched with symbols for crimes like idleness. You're picturing one in the steward's belt, its notches glinting, and grinning grimly. It's like a medieval demerit system, nastier than those shame boards we saw in Victorian halls. You're half tempted to snap it when he's not looking, but his heavy tread outside keeps you raking. The violence's threat as constant as the Lord's token we wore, a mark of your servitude's pain. Historians still argue whether this violence was a practical tool to enforce discipline or a sadistic assertion of dominance, with no clear motive in manorial records or chronicles. Some, citing labor demands, say it was needed to keep estates productive. Others, pointing to its excess, argue it was about terrorizing serfs into submission, reinforcing their slave-like status. You're wincing as a horse snorts, the welt pulsing, and wondering if the steward hit you to speed your work or to feel like a lord. The great hall's feasts, the feudal chains, and the yard's toil we faced now a gauntlet of pain. The wedding, night's fear of harm we felt a faint echo of this brutality, your body a canvas for Ranulph's rule. Time for a quick joke. Why was the tally stick so mean? Because it counted Alice's tears, not tasks. You're chuckling, but it's hush. The stable boy's cough nearby drowns it. His back is scarred as yours. You're piling straw, the torch's heat prickling. As you take in the scene, picture the scene. The stable's a rough cave with stalls of restless horses, piles of muck, and a creaky cart in the corner. The manor's pulse beating through your labor. You're not in the yard's muddy chaos or the kitchen's steaming pots. You're in a space of punishment, where violence is the Lord's law. You're raking, hauling, cleaning straw for beds, dung for fields, water for troughs, but one slip, like that tray, brings the steward's fist or whip. The feudal system's yoke we felt a lash on your skin. The hierarchy's ranks now a brutal pecking order, like the ignorance that crushed souls in other tales. The violence isn't just pain, it's terror, a reminder you're his. The laudanum-like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this wound, though you rake on. Alice's grit your shield. Step closer to the stall and notice the details. The coarse straw under your fingers, the faint whinny of a mare, the way the welt's heat pulses, a mark of your suffering. This stable's your crucible, like those task chants we hummed for rhythm, but it's savage. A place where your body's broken for others' gain. You're thinking of that fealty ring, how it binds you to this pain, and how the violence slaps for slowness, kicks for cheek mirrors the labor's toll we hauled, each blow a chain. You're wondering why your work earns a lash, why your pain's worth less than Ranulph's wine. The myths of noble lords will hear a cruel jest as you bleed, strong but brutalized. You're craving mercy, but the stewards shout, "Faster, Alice," spurs you, the violence a noose, like the Victorian stigma sneer we faced. Here's another chuckle. Why was the steward's whip so busy? Because it loved dancing on Alice's back. You're smiling, but it's bitter the stable boy's grunt pulls you back. His welt's a shared scar. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil they've led here, where violence is the servant's sentence, not just work but a life scarred. Like the wedding night's physical fears we faced, you're remembering those task chants, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rubble marks we carved in later eras, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other servants' scullions, plowmen their welts like yours, each lash a shared wound, their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight. Now bruised by this brutality, as you pile the straw, the steward's shadow passing, you're aching for safety, the stable's muck, a trap, the violence's sting a wound you can't hide, like the token's chafing. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just punishment, it's oppression, brutalizing servants like slaves by breaking their bodies, driven by power and fear. You're thinking of those punishment tallies, marking your pain, like Victorian fines marked shame, and how they reflect a society that thrives on your suffering. You're wondering about the servant you'll be, if you'll outlast this lash or snap, and the thousands who've raked here before, their lives lost in the straw. The torch dims, the stable stirs, and you're carrying this brutal pain, ready to probe the starvation that kept you weak, a hunger as cruel as the whip's crack. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the lash so fierce? Because it loved Alice's cries more. You're brushing straw off, the rake set aside, as the stable's din surges, with violent punishments heavy in your soul. You're ready to explore the starvation that starved your strength, a torment that sealed your servitude. You're hunched over a rough wooden table in the manor's dank undercroft, the air heavy with the scent of moldy grain and the faint sourness of stale ale, sloshing in a cracked jug. A single rushlight flickers, barely cutting the gloom, and you're Alice, a servant in the 13th century, your stomach gnawing as you break a crust of coarse barley bread. The welt from the steward's lash we felt in the stable still throbbing. The kitchen's clatter is a distant hum, but the feudal chains that bound us there, and the yard's grueling toil linger. Your body weak from hunger as much as work. You're here to probe the starvation that kept medieval servants weak, the meager rations that starved your strength, a torment as cruel as the violence we endured, reinforcing your slave-like servitude. This is the ache of hunger, and you're feeling its grip, sharp as the bread's grit in your teeth, hollow as the shadows swallowing the room. The mainstream fact is that medieval servants, especially serfs, were often given barely enough food to survive, with rations of coarse bread, thin gruel, and occasional scraps, as documented in manorial accounts and estate inventories from the 13th century. Lords like Ranulph prioritized their tables feasts of venison and wine we glimpsed in the hall, while you subsisted on scraps, your diet designed to keep you working but too weak to rebel, with malnutrition common. You're chewing the bread, its texture like gravel, and you're starving, the ale watery, a far cry from the manor's bounty. The stable's lash we faced and the feudal system's yoke we carried, now a hunger that saps your will, as debilitating as the Victorian wage trap we met in another era. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some servants resorted to gruel tricks, mixing sawdust or chaff into their porridge to stretch rations, a desperate hack shared in village whispers. In the 13th century, archaeological finds of kitchen middens show traces of these fillers. A grim survival tactic. You're stirring your gruel, a pinch of chaff hidden in it, and grinning. It's like a medieval life hack, sneakier than those punishment tallies we saw in the stable. You're half tempted to add more, fooling your stomach, but the steward's footsteps above keep you cautious. The starvation's bite as constant as the fealty rings rust we twisted, a torment no trick can dull. Historians still argue whether this starvation was a deliberate strategy to control servants, or an economic necessity to stretch limited resources, with no clear intent in manorial ledgers or chronicles. Some, citing lords' wealth, say it was a tool to weaken serfs, ensuring submission like slavery. Others, noting frequent famines, argue it was a harsh reality of scarce harvests, shared by all but hitting you hardest. You're swallowing the gruel, its thinness mocking, and wondering if Ranulph starves you to break your spirit or because the manor's stores are low. The great hall's feasts, the stable's violence, and the yard's labor we faced, now a hunger that chains you. The wedding night's fear of harm, we felt a faint echo of this wasting. Your body a husk for the Lord's gain. Time for a quick joke. Why was the gruel so stingy? Because it loved Alice's hunger more. You're chuckling, but its hushed a scullion's cough across the table drowns it, her cheeks as sunken as yours. You're breaking another crust, the rushlights glow faint, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The undercroft's a grim vault, with barrels of grain locked away, a dirt floor, and a table scarred by years of desperate meals. A world, apart from the hall's torchlit feasts, or the stable's muck we raked. You're not in the yard's muddy chaos, or the kitchen's steaming pots. You're in a space of want, where starvation's the Lord's whip. Your rations bread, gruel, a rare onion are doled out by the steward, barely enough to fuel the plowing, scrubbing, and hauling we toiled through. The feudal system's grip a chain on your stomach. The hierarchy's ranks now a pecking order for scraps, like the ignorance that starved souls in other tales. The hunger's not just empty, it's control, keeping you frail. The laudanum like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this void, though you eat on. Alice's grit your core. Step closer to the jug and notice the details. The cold clay under your fingers, the faint drip of a leak, the way the bread's crumbs cling to your lips. A mark of your need. This undercrofts your cell, like those task chants we hummed for rhythm, but it's hollow. A place where your body's starved for others' feasts. You're thinking of that Lord's token, how it brands you, and how starvation barely a loaf for a week's work mirrors the violence we faced, each crumb a lash to your strength. You're wondering why your labor earns only hunger, why Ranulph's hounds eat better. The myths of noble lords will hear a cruel jest as you waste, strong but famished. You're craving a full belly, but the jug's near empty. the system a cage, like the Victorian privacy's theft we mourned. Here's another chuckle. Why was the bread so tough? Because it fought Alice's teeth for sport. You're smiling, but it's grim. The scullion's sigh pulls you back, her hunger a shared scar. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash they've led here, where starvation's the servant's sentence. Not just work, but a life drained, like the wedding night surrender we faced. You're remembering those gruel tricks, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved in later eras. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other servants' milkmaids, plowmen, their hunger like yours, each crust a shared wound, their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight, now hollowed by this famine. As you push the jug away, the steward's call echoing above, you're aching for strength. The undercroft's gloom a trap, the starvation's bite a wound you can't fill, like the welt's burn. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just hunger, it's oppression, brutalizing servants like slaves by starving their bodies, driven by power and greed. You're thinking of those gruel tricks, stretching nothing, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that thrives on your weakness. You're wondering about the servant you'll be, if you'll outlast this famine or fade, and the thousands who've starved here before, their lives lost in the grain. The rushlight dims, the manor stirs, and you're carrying this hollow ache, ready to navigate the stolen freedom that locked you here, a bondage as cruel as the empty jug. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the hunger so fierce? Because it loved Alice's bones more. You're rising from the table, the crust gone, as the undercroft's chill surges, with starvation's torment heavy in your soul. You're ready to explore the legal bonds that stole your freedom, a chain that sealed your servitude. You're trudging across the frost-crusted fields of the medieval manor, the air biting with the scent of frozen earth and the faint smoke of distant village fires. Dawn's pale light barely warms your patched tunic, and your alleys a serf. In the 13th century, your hands numb as you drag a wooden plow, the gnawing hunger from the undercroft's meager crust still hollowing your gut. The manor's walls loom behind, a reminder of the lash we felt in the stable and the feudal chains that bind you to Lord Ranulph's will. You're here to navigate the legal bonds that stole your freedom, the iron laws that locked you to this land, making your servitude as inescapable as slavery, a prison without walls. This is the chain of bondage, and you're feeling its weight, heavy as the plow's drag, cold as the frost under your boots. The mainstream fact is that medieval serfs, like you, were legally bound to their lord's estate under feudal law, unable to leave, marry, or own property without permission, as recorded in manorial court rolls and legal codes like the customs of the manor. From the 13th century, as a serf, you're tied to Ranulph's land by birth. You're labor plowing, harvesting, serving his by right, with escape punishable by recapture or death. Your status codified to keep you enslaved. You're pulling the plow, the steward's eye from the ridge burning, and you're trapped, knowing you can't flee to the village. The yard's toil we hauled and the undercroft's starvation we endured, now a life sentence, as rigid as the Victorian hierarchy's ranks we met, but older, crueler. But here's a quirky tidbit. Serfs sometimes carried freedom pennies, single coins saved in secret, a symbolic hope of buying release from servitude, though few succeeded. In the 13th century, village finds show these, often hidden in straw or buried. You're patting one in your pocket, a worn copper piece, and grinning. It's like a medieval lottery ticket, shinier than those fealty rings we twisted in the kitchen. You're half dreaming of handing it to Ranulph, claiming your life. But the steward's whip crack in the distance snaps you back. The legal bonds as tight as the stable's lash we faced, a dream no coin can break. Unlike the Victorian pantry's quiet defiance, historians still argue whether these legal bonds were primarily economic, securing labor for manors, or a social tool to enforce class oppression, with no clear motive in charters or court records. Some, citing agricultural needs, say they were necessary to sustain estates. Others, pointing to lords' absolute power, argue they were designed to dehumanize serfs, mirroring slavery's control. Like the stigma we'll face in towns, you're straining against the plow, mud sucking your boots, and wondering if Ranulph binds you to harvest his fields or to prove his might. The great hall's feasts, the stable's violence, and the undercroft's hunger we faced now illegal. Cage, the wedding night's loss of choice, we felt a faint echo of this theft. Your freedom a ghost in the frost. Time for a quick joke. Why was the freedom penny so shy? Because it knew Alice's chains were stronger. You're chuckling, but it's hushed. A plowman's grunt nearby drowns it. His back is bent as yours. You're guiding the plow, the field's chill seeping in, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The field's a vast, frozen expanse, with furrows stretching to the horizon, oxen bellowing, and serfs like you toiling under the steward's gaze. The manor's pulse in your sweat. You're not in the undercroft's grim vault or the stable's muck. You're in the manor's open prison, where legal bonds are law. You're plowing, sowing, reaping fields for Ranulph's wealth, wood for his fires, wool for his trade, but you're not free. The feudal system's yoke we felt a lock on your life. The hierarchy's ranks now a caste you can't climb, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The bonds aren't just land, they're your soul, your children's too. The manor's fields your cell. The laudanum like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this trap. Though you plow on, Alice's resolve your spark. Step closer to the furrow and notice the details. The cold mud under your fingers, the faint creak of the plow, the way the penny's edge presses your thigh, a fleeting hope. This field's your sentence, like those task chants we hummed for rhythm. But it's eternal, a place where your life's owned. You're thinking of that lord's token, how it brands you, and how these bonds no leaving, no marrying without. Gold mirror the violence we faced, each law a lash to your will. You're wondering why your birth chains you, why Ranulph's word outranks your dreams. The myths of divine lords will hear a cruel jest as you labor, strong but shackled. You're craving escape, but the field's endless, the system a noose. Like the Victorian privacy's theft we mourned. Here's another chuckle. Why was the field so vast? Because it loved swallowing Alice's hopes. You're smiling, but it's grim. The plowman's cough pulls you back. His chain's a shared scar. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger they've led here. Where legal bonds are the servant's cage, not just work but a life stolen. Like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rubble marks we carved in later eras. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other serfs' milkmaids, carters their bonds like yours. Each furrow a shared wound, their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight. Now locked by this law's grip, as you pause, the plow stuck in frost, the steward's shout spurring you. You're aching for a horizon beyond the manor. The field's cold a trap, the legal bonds a weight you can't shed, like the tokens chafing. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just law, it's theft, brutalizing servants like slaves by stealing their freedom. driven by power and land. You're thinking of those freedom pennies, a hopeless dream, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that thrives on your bondage. You're wondering about the serf you'll be, if you'll outlast this cage or break, and the thousands who've plowed here before, their lives lost in the furrows. The dawn fades, the manor calls, and you're carrying this stolen freedom, ready to delve into the social scorn that branded you, a stigma as cruel as the plow's drag. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the bond so tight? Because it loved Alice's life more. You're yanking the plow, the field unyielding, as the manor's din rises. With legal bonds heavy in your soul, you're ready to explore the social scorn that marked you, a shame that sealed your servitude. You're shuffling through the muddy lanes of the nearby village, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke and the faint tang of freshly baked bread, wafting from a baker's hut. A coarse hood shields your face, and your alleys, a serf in the 13th century. Your patched tunic marking you as a manor servant as you clutch a basket of eggs to trade for thread. Villagers in woolen cloaks cast sidelong glances, their whispers cutting like frost, a stark reminder of the legal bonds we felt chaining you to Lord Ranulph's fields last time. You're here to delve into the social scorn that branded medieval servants, the stigma that marked you as lesser, reinforcing your slave-like servitude beyond the manor's walls. This is the lash of shame, and you're feeling its sting, raw as the cold biting your fingers, heavy as the eyes judging your every step. The mainstream fact is that medieval serfs and servants faced widespread social stigma, viewed as inferior by free peasants, artisans, and nobles, who saw your bound status as a sign of divine disfavor or moral failing. As noted in sermons and village records from the 13th century, your role as a serf, tied to Ranulph's manor we explored, branded you unfree, your labor plowing, serving dismissed as base, your character suspect, with society shunning you as barely human. You're dodging a merchant's sneer as you near the market stall, the lord's token from the hall's weight around your neck a public badge. And you're shrinking. The stable's lash we endured and the undercroft's starvation we tasted, now a scorn that follows you as damning as the Victorian street stigma we faced in another era. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some serfs wore humble cloaks, plain gray hoods mandated by local custom to signal their status, a visual cue to keep you apart from free folk, like a medieval uniform. In the 13th century, village bylaws mention these, enforced by fines. You're tugging your cloak tighter, its drab weave a mark, and grinning it's like a medieval kick-me sign, grimmer than those freedom pennies we clutched in the fields. You're half tempted to toss it off, claiming a moment's pride, but a weaver's tut as she passes keeps you covered. The stigma's weight heavier than the feudal laws we navigated, a shame no cloak can hide. Historians still argue whether this stigma was a deliberate tool to isolate serfs or a cultural reflex of a rigidly hierarchical society with no clear intent in chronicles or court rolls. Some, citing noble attitudes, say it was engineered to reinforce servitude, keeping you submissive like a slave. Others, noting widespread prejudice, argue it was a byproduct of feudal values, branding you without thought, like the violence we faced. You're offering eggs to the stall-keeper, her curt not a slight, and wondering if this scorn's meant to crush you or just flows from their world. The great hall's feasts, the stable's whip, and the field's chains we faced now, a public curse. The wedding night's shame we felt a faint echo of this branding. Your worth erased by a glance. Time for a quick joke. Why was the humble cloak so drab? Because it loved shaming Alice's dreams. You're chuckling, but it's hushed. A child's giggle nearby drowns it, and you're wary of a priest's passing stare. You're clutching the basket, the mud slick underfoot, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The village lane's a crowded maze, with stalls of wool and fish, peasants bartering, and a church spire looming, its bell tolling judgment. You're not in the field's frozen furrows or the undercroft's grim vault. You're in society's open scorn, where stigma's the law. Your serf's tunic, your token they scream unfree, drawing hisses from those who'd starve. Without your labor, the tasks we toiled through in the yard, a hidden engine for their world. You're feeling the humiliation, how a baker serves you last, how a free peasant steps aside like you're cursed. The manners demands we saw now, a public shunning, like the ignorance that cloaked brides in other tales. The stigma's not just scorn, it's a wall, cutting you from dignity. The laudanum like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this disgrace. Though you walk on, alleys grit your shield. Step closer to the stall and notice the details. The rough wicker of the basket, the faint clink of a coin from a buyer, the way your cloak's hem drags in the mud, a mark of your place. This lane's a stage, like those task chants we hummed for rhythm. But it's cruel, branding you with every stare. You're thinking of that fealty ring, how it binds you, and how stigma whispers of base serf, refusals to trade fairly mirrors. The starvation we faced, each slight a lash to your soul. You're wondering why your work feeding the manor, serving Ranulph, is less than a merchant's idleness. Why society scorns the hands that sustain it, the myths of divine lords. We'll hear a cruel echo as you stand, strong but shamed. You're craving respect, but the village's eyes are cold, the stigma a chain, like the legal bonds we plowed through. Here's another chuckle. Why was the village so mean? Because it loved scorning Alice's eggs. You're smiling, but it's bitter. A beggar's nod pulls you back, his kindness rarer than the gentry's. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the field's laws they've led here, where stigma's the serf's public chain. Not just work, but a life branded, like the wedding night's exposure we faced. You're remembering those gruel tricks, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rubble marks we carved in later eras. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other serfs' garters, cooks there, stigma like yours, each sneer a shared wound. Their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight, now tarnished by this shame as you trade the eggs. The stall-keeper's grumble echoing. You're aching for a place among them, the village's bustle a gauntlet, the stigma a mark you can't scrub off. Like the manor's mud, you're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just scorn, it's a system, brutalizing serfs like slaves by branding them lesser, driven by class and cruelty. You're thinking of those humble cloaks, hiding your shame, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that needs you but despises you. You're wondering about the serf you'll be, if you'll bear this scorn or defy it. And the thousands who've walked here before, their dignity lost in the market. The fog thickens, the lane fades, and you're carrying this branded shame, ready to explore the religious justifications that sanctified this cruelty. A divine lie as harsh as the village's eyes. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the stigma so loud? Because it shamed alleys fiercer than bells. You're slipping from the stall, the thread tucked close, as the village's hum softens, with social scorn heavy in your soul. You're ready to probe the church's role in servitude, a sanctity that sealed your chains. You're kneeling on the cold stone floor of the village chapel, the air heavy with the scent of incense, and the faint must of damp prayer books stacked in the pews. A single candle flickers on the altar, casting trembling shadows on a wooden crucifix, and your alleys, a serf in the 13th century, your hands clasped tightly as you pray. The village's scorn from those muddy lanes still burning like a brand. The manor's fields and the stable's lash are distant, but the feudal chains that bind you to Lord Ranulph's will linger. Your hunger and wealth's a constant ache. You're here to explore how the church sanctified the cruelty of medieval servitude, its teachings justifying your slave-like treatment with divine authority, making your suffering a holy duty. This is the weight of sacred shame, and you're feeling its press, heavy as the cross above, sharp as the priest's voice echoing through the nave. The mainstream fact is that the medieval church, particularly from the 11th to 13th centuries, endorsed the feudal hierarchy as God's will, teaching that serfs like you were divinely ordained to serve lords. As outlined in sermons and texts like the Decretum of Gratian circa 1140, priests preached that your labor, pain, and submission were part of a sacred order, with rebellion a sin against heaven, cementing your servitude with spiritual chains. You're bowing your head, the priest's sermon on obeying your betters, ringing, and you're trembling, the village's stigma we faced now cloaked in God's name. The stable's violence, and the undercroft's starvation we endured a burden you're told to bear. As binding as the Victorian religious guilt we met in another era, but older, sterner. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some serfs carried saints' beads, crude wooden rosaries blessed by priests, believed to protect you from divine wrath. If you served faithfully, a talisman for obedience. In the 13th century, church inventories list these, handed out to serfs like you. You're fingering yours, the beads worn smooth, and grinning. It's like a medieval Fitbit for piety, holier than those humble cloaks we wore in the village. You're half tempted to pray harder, hoping for mercy, but the priest's glare and the sermon's weight keep you silent. The church's sanction as unyielding as the punishment tallies. We saw in the stable a divine lash to your soul. Historians still argue whether the church's role was a cynical power play to support lords, or a genuine belief in a divine hierarchy, with no clear intent in ecclesiastical records or chronicles. Some, citing church wealth from tithes, say it propped up feudalism to enrich bishops and ally with nobles. Others, noting theological texts, argue it reflected a sincere view of social order as God's plan, like the violence we faced. You're clutching the beads, the stone floor bruising your knees, and wondering if the priest preaches your servitude to please Ranulph or to please God. The great hall's feasts, the field's chains, and the village's scorn we face now. A sacred curse, the wedding night's guilt we felt a faint echo of this holy burden. You're suffering a prayer you can't escape. Time for a quick joke. Why were the saints' beads so heavy? Because they carried Alice's sins for Ranulph. You're chuckling, but it's hushed, the creak of a pew drowns it. And you're wary of a villager's glance. You're shifting, the prayer book slipping. As you take in the scene, you picture the scene. The chapel's stark but solemn, with rough benches, a stone altar, and stained glass casting dim colors. A far cry from the village's bustling lanes or the manor's muddy yard. You're not in the stable's brutal muck or the undercroft's grim vault. You're in a space of divine judgment, where the church's voice is law. The priest's sermon serfs must toil. Lords must rule makes your stomach churn, framing your labor. The lash we took, and the hunger we starved through as God's will. The feudal system's yoke we felt now blessed, the hierarchy's ranks, a heavenly caste, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The church's sanction isn't just words. It's a chain, tying your soul to Ranulph's manor, The laudanum-like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this shame, though you pray on. Alice's grit your spark. Step closer to the altar and notice the details. The cool stone under your palms, the faint hum of the priest's chant, the way the candle's flame sways like your hope, fragile under God's gaze. This chapel's a refuge, like those gruel tricks we used to stretch hunger, but it's oppressive. A courtroom where your servitude's sanctified. You're thinking of that fealty ring, how it binds you, and how the church's teachings obey. Endure, submit, mirror the legal bonds we plowed through, each sermon a lash to your spirit. You're wondering why God wants you to suffer, why your pain's holy but Ranulph's feasts aren't. The myths of divine lords a cruel jest. As you kneel, strong but shamed, you're craving salvation, but the church offers only duty, the beads a lie. Like the Victorian prayer tokens we clutched in another time. Here's another chuckle. Why was the sermon so long? Because it loved preaching Alice's chains. You're smiling, but it's bitter a woman's cough pulls you back, her piety a shared scar. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn they've led here, where the church's sanction is the serf's holy chain. Not just work, but a life damned, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those task chants, a spark of defiance, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved in later eras. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other serfs, ploughmen, maids, their prayers like yours, each bead a shared wound, their toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight. Now burdened by this divine lie as you rise from your knees, the priest's chant fading, you're aching for a God who sees you, the chapel's stone a cage, the church's justification a weight you can't lift, like the tokens chafing. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just faith, it's control. Brutalizing serfs like slaves by sanctifying their pain. Driven by power and piety. You're thinking of those saints' beads, binding your soul, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that cloaks cruelty in holiness. You're wondering about the serf you'll be, if you'll bear this shame or defy it. And the thousands who've knelt here before, their spirits lost in the incense. The candle dims, the chapel empties, and you're carrying this sacred cruelty, ready to discover the quiet defiant serf sparked, a whisper against the lash. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the church so stern? Because it loved Ranulph's whip more. You're slipping from the pew, the beads left behind. As the chapel's hush deepens, with religious justification heavy in your soul, you're ready to explore the serf's quiet resistance, the defiance that broke their chains. You're tucked into the shadowy corner of the manor's hayloft, the air thick with the scent of dry straw, and the faint musk of oxen from the stalls below. A sliver of moonlight sneaks through a cracked shutter, casting a pale glow, and you're Alice, a serf in the 13th century, your patched tunic scratching as you whisper with Godric, a ploughman, his calloused hands passing you a stolen apple. The chapel's sacred shame still clings from that cold pew, but here, in this hidden nook, you're plotting a quiet rebellion against the manor's chains. You're here to discover the subtle resistance medieval serfs sparked, the defiant acts that pushed back against their slave-like brutalization. From the stable's lash to the village's scorn, this is the ember of defiance, and you're feeling its warmth. Fragile as the moonlight, but fierce as the glint in Godric's eyes. The mainstream fact is that medieval serfs, despite their oppressive conditions, engaged in covert resistance, such as work slowdowns, pilfering food, or spreading subversive tales. As noted in manorial court records and peasant folklore from the 13th century, unable to openly rebel due to the risk of death or torture. You found ways to reclaim agency, hiding grain, feigning illness, or whispering dissent within the feudal system's grip we felt in the fields. You're biting the apple, its tartness, a stolen joy, and you're grinning, heart-pounding. The church's divine sanction we prayed under, now a rule you're bending. As daring as the Victorian pantry whispers we plotted in another era. A spark against the stable's whip and the undercroft's hunger. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some serfs left defiant scratches. Tiny carvings of birds or broken chains in hidden spots. Like loft beams or barn walls, a secret mark of rebellion. In the 13th century, archaeological finds in manor estates reveal these. Etched by hands like yours. You're tracing a bird on the loft's wood, your knife barely scoring, and chuckling. It's like medieval street art, bolder than those saints' beads we clutched in the chapel. You're half tempted to carve deeper, claiming this space. But Godric's warning nudge and a creak below keep you cautious. The resistance's thrill tempered by the punishment tallies we faced. A risk you're defying with this apple's crunch. Historians still argue whether these acts of resistance were meaningful challenges to feudal oppression, or mere survival tactics, with no clear impact in court rolls or chronicles. Some, citing peasant revolts like 1381, say they built toward broader rebellion, weakening lords' control. Others, noting their secrecy, argue they were too small to shift the slave-like servitude. Like the violence we endured. You're sharing the apple, Godric's tale of losing a sack of grain, sparking ideas, and wondering if this defiance counts or just keeps you alive. The great hall's feasts, the field's chains, and the village's scorn we face now. A weight you're pushing against. The wedding night's quiet courage we felt, a mirror to this spark. Your spirit unbroken despite the yoke. Time for a quick joke. Why was the defiant scratch so sneaky? Because it flew past Ranulph's whip. You're chuckling, but its hushed Godric's snort stifles it. And you're wary of the steward's patrol. You're leaning closer to the beam, the moonlight faint, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The hayloft's a cramped sanctuary, with bales stacked high, a pitchfork leaning. And the moonlight a conspiratorial glow, a world apart from the chapel's solemn pews, or the village's scornful lanes. You're not in the stable's brutal muck, or the undercroft's grim vault. You're in a stolen space, where defiance whispers. Godric's sharing a trick, drag your plow to slow the day while you plan to spill flour. Small acts that chip at Ranulph's control we cowered under. The feudal systems yoke a backdrop to this rebellion, like the sisterhood's whispers. In other tales, you're feeling the rush, how these moments steal back a piece of you. The privacy we lost in the fields reclaimed in this flicker. The manor's demands now a rule you're twisting. Step closer to the bale and notice the details. The prickly straw under your fingers, the faint low of cattle below. The way the apple's core rests. A tiny victory. This loft's a refuge, like those gruel tricks we used to stretch hunger. But it's alive. A stage for your fight. You're thinking of that shame from the village, how it branded you, and how these axe apples, scratches, dawdling erase its mark, a defiance of the starvation we faced. You're wondering about other serf cooks hiding broth, milkmaids losing cream, their rebellions like yours, their birds carved in shadows, the myths of holy lords we heard a lie. As you plot with Godric, strong despite the lash, you're craving freedom, but the loft's a start. The laudanum like herbs will meet no match for this spark. Alice's resolve burning bright. Here's another chuckle. Why was the apple so sweet? Because it tasted like Ranulph's loss. You're smiling, but it's fierce Godric's plan to sicken a day pulls you back. His courage afire. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame they've led here, where resistance is the serf's whisper. Not just work, but a life reclaimed, like the wedding night's defiance we felt. You're remembering those task chants, a shared spirit, and how they align with this loft's plot. A fight against a crushing world. You're thinking of other serfs' garters, maids their rebellions like yours, each act a shared flame. There, toil a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the ale pitcher's weight. Now lit by this defiance, as you hide the apple core, Godric's shadow slipping away. You're ready to creep back to work. The hayloft's secrets a warmth against. The manor's cold, the resistance a seed you'll nurture. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just defiance, it's survival. A way for serfs to reclaim their souls from a system that enslaved them. Driven by courage and cunning. You're thinking of those defiance scratches, etching your fight, like the laudanum like herbs, that dulled other pains, and how they reflect a society that pushed you down but couldn't douse your spark. You're wondering about the serf you'll be, if you'll defy more or be caught, and the thousands who've plotted here before, their spirits in the straw. The moonlight fades, the manor hums, and you're carrying this quiet defiance, ready to reflect on the legacy of servile pain, a mark on a world. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was resistance so quiet? Because it out-whispered the manor's chains. You're slipping from the loft, the straw rustling, as the dark closes in. With quiet resistance heavy in your soul, you're ready to explore the legacy of servitude, the pain that shaped a society. You're perched on a mossy stone by the edge of the manor's fields, the air soft with the scent of dew, and the faint tang of freshly turned earth. As dawn paints the sky in hues of gold, a tattered cloak wraps your shoulders, and your alleys, a serf in the 13th century. Your hands clutching a worn defiance scratch a tiny wooden bird carved in the hayloft's rebellion. With Godric, the village's scorn and the chapel's sacred shame fade into the morning's hush. But the feudal chains, the lash, and the hunger linger, your body a map of their toll. You're here to reflect on the legacy of servile pain, how the brutalization of medieval servants shaped society's heart and future, a mark that echoes beyond the manor's walls. This is the shadow of suffering, and you're feeling its weight. Gentle as the breeze, but enduring as the earth beneath you. The mainstream fact is that the brutal treatment of medieval serfs, peaking from the 11th to 13th centuries, left a profound legacy on European society, influencing peasant revolts, legal reforms, and cultural shifts. As seen in chronicles and early labor laws like the Statute of Laborers 1351, your pain-grueling labor, violence, starvation we endured exposed feudalism's cruelty, sparking uprisings like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt and slow changes in land rights, planting seeds for freer labor, a ripple from the stable's lash to the field's chains we plowed. You're tracing the bird's edges, its defiance a spark, and you're seeing your struggle, from the hall's ale to the loft's whispers, as a thread in this shift. The resistance we plotted a seed for a world where serfs might stand unbowed, unlike the Victorian servitude's legacy we explored. But here's a quirky tidbit. Serf suffering inspired sorrow songs, haunting ballads sung in villages about toil and chains, preserved in oral tradition and later written in 14th century manuscripts. These melodies, like your task chants, gave voice to your pain, echoing in markets we walked. You're humming one now, its notes low, and grinning it's like a medieval protest single, rawer than those defiant scratches we carved in the loft. You're half tempted to sing louder, letting the fields hear, but a plowman's distant. Cough keeps you soft. The legacies weight heavier than the freedom pennies we clutched. A mark on history's song. Historians still argue whether serfs' brutalization drove significant societal change, or was a minor catalyst in feudalism's slow decline, with no clear verdict in revolts records or legal texts. Some, citing the 1381 revolt, say it galvanized peasant power, reshaping labor norms. Others, noting feudalism's longevity, argue its impact was limited, dwarfed by plagues and trade. Like the stigma we faced, you're rubbing the bird, the field's frost underfoot, and wondering if your pain, from the undercroft's hunger to the village's scorn, changed anything, or if it's a whisper in time, the hall's feasts, the stable's whip, and the chapel's shame we faced, a quiet cry against a louder world. The wedding night's courage we felt, a mirror to your own, a spark that might yet burn. Time for a quick joke. Why did the sorrow song wail? Because it outcried Alice's silent chains. You're chuckling, but its soft a bird's chirp drowns it. And you're wary of the steward's dawn patrol. You're settling deeper on the stone, the cloak slipping, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The field's a quiet expanse, with furrows stretching under the dawn. Mist curling like a sigh, a world apart from the village's scornful lanes or the chapel's solemn pews. You're not in the loft's defiant glow or the stable's brutal muck. You're in a space of reflection, where servitude's legacy feels vast. Your life pouring ale we started with, hauling slop. Hiding scratches wasn't just pain, it was a force, shaping revolts, songs, and laws. From chronicles to village tales, the tasks we labored through, a spark for change, like the sisterhood's defiance in other tales. You're feeling the ripple, how your suffering, tied to Ranulph's power, and the church's sanction, nudged society to see serfs as human, not chattel, a shift as slow as the dawn's rise. Step closer to the field and notice the details. The cool moss under your fingers, the faint low of cattle, the way the bird's wood warms in your palm. A tiny rebellion. This stone's a bridge, like those gruel tricks stretching hunger. But it's timeless, weaving your story into history's cloth. You're thinking of that lash for the tray, how it scarred deeper than skin, and how it fueled songs that questioned such cruelty, or the loft's resistance. A whisper that echoed in revolts, the feudal chains we plowed breaking link by link. You're wondering about other serf skooks, carters, their struggles like yours. Their ballads sung in fields, their defiance shaping a world where labor might mean choice, not slavery, a legacy from the undercroft's crust to tomorrow's hope. Here's another chuckle. Why was the legacy so deep? Because it grew from Alice's tears. You're smiling, but it's tender. The dawn's light feels like promise, a new day's hope. You're also connecting the threads. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame. The loft's spark they've led here, where servile pain left a mark. From songs to revolts, a legacy of suffering turned to progress. You're remembering those laudanum like herbs, numbing other struggles, and how your fight, like Godric's, outshone them, a defiance that echoes in freer lives. You're thinking of serfs who followed, their work less chained, their stories built on yours. Each pain a seed for change. Now, let's let the world ease, the edges softening like a whispered lullaby. You're still on that stone, the fields, dawn wrapping you in a gentle embrace, the manor's chains fading into the mist's silver hush. Godric's carved bird rests light in your hands, a warm ember of defiance, the lash, hunger, and scorn dissolving like dew under the rising sun. You've walked through halls and fields, carried pain, shame, and sparks, and that's enough. Picture a quiet meadow, its grasses swaying in morning's glow, where your struggle, Godric's courage, and countless serfs' dreams drift like petals on a breeze. The chains, the whips, the shadows, they're gone, leaving only peace, a world cradling you close. Let the dawn deepen, let the silence hold you. Your heart's full, your eyes heavy, and the morning's ready to weave you into its dreams. Sleep now, sweet listener, and rest in the glow of stories that endure, soft as the sunrise ahead.